Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Janelle Blue, president of the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society, who is also the sponsor of this program. And today our guest is Cheryl Batchelor, and Cheryl is one of our most important members. She's on the board of directors. She is also our webmaster, which is very critical today in the life of Zoom, and she edits our newsletter as well. So welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today.
It's great to be here.
So when you joined MVGS just a few years ago, and we put you to work right away, what were your goals? What did you really plan to do with our organization?
Well, I had just retired from the FBI, and I wanted to join the society because I had never been in a situation where I could be part of a true genealogical group of people and learn from them. So I've been doing this on my own, slogging through all the research. And so I just wanted to be near people that had been doing this for a while so I could learn what they do and learn tips and tricks to help me do my research and help me progress in my own research.
We do give a lot of opportunity to members and through our programs.
Yes.
We have speakers every month. And also a lot of the camaraderie. I mean, it's really nice to be able to sit with somebody who's also interested in genealogy and wants to hear your story.
Yes.
And you get a few of us in the room together, and it's endless stories. You never run out of things to talk about. So those skills that you had as in the FBI and other parts of your career, that must have lent some value to researching, right?
I think so. I started out my adult career as a military intelligence person in the Army, and I learned analytic skills and some investigative skills through the Army and its training. Then I went on to do investigative work on the Gulf War illness investigation. So I was a senior analyst there, so I was able to grow my skills a little bit and continued as a contractor after I left the service to do intelligence work for the government. Mm-hmm. And so that has helped me really look at pieces of information and put it together like a puzzle. And I think I'm good at that. I think research is far my strongest skill as a genealogist. I like to write, but I think my research skills are strong based on my background.
And that's the part most genealogists love doing the research, right? Looking for that needle in the haystack.
Yes.
So what are you working on now?
Well, I'm continuing to work on my brick wall, which is who the father of my third great-grandfather is. My third great-grandfather is Blake Faulkner. His family, still my family, is in Florida, and we still own the property that he owned in Florida in 1860. So that continues to be the big part of my research. I do a lot of other stuff. I have some friends I've done work for, some other clients I've done work for. But for my own personal research, I do the Faulkners, the Blanton family, and the Batchelor family.
Okay.
And I said my son's genealogy stretches from Florida to Persia. And
Wow.
so
that's quite a distance.
It is a distance. His grandmother was Persian. So I hope to be able to fill in the blanks for him. He's the only child, and so I want to create a project for him. So 2 books, maybe my maternal side and paternal side. So hopefully I'll get to that.
So Persian research, or Iranian,
Right.
How do you do that?
Oh, well, I've stumbled with that, but a lot of information now is being translated and is available through FamilySearch and Ancestry. And so my husband did not know who his great-grandparents were at all. He knew his Persian grandparents just by name, but he didn't know anything about them. So I've been actually able to show him a picture of where his great-grandfather lived in New York, and his immigration documents and those kind of things. But I've actually found my mother-in-law's family outside of Tehran. So
goodness.
I've been lucky, but it takes time, and you have to just dig around and look for societies that might be able to help you. And that's how I found where to go for her. I found a Persian society that I contacted, and they gave me some hints on where I could go to look for information.
Here in the States?
Here in the States.
Uh-huh.
So I found the fact that her father had built a church outside of Tehran, and they were Christian. And so that was another discriminator for them that might bring them up into light.
Yeah.
So I was able to find out her father's name was Gabriel Natter, and I've got a picture of the church that he built, actually.
Oh, my gosh.
So I've been lucky, and my husband's been thrilled because he knew nothing about his family.
And what does your son think of all this?
He just shakes his head. I call him occasionally and tell him things that I found, but, he's young still, so he's like, oh, well, maybe someday. But I think he's interested. It's just, I did give him for his 28th birthday a huge family tree chart that I've got a big printer, and it prints beautiful trees.
Oh my
and it was
gosh.
this big.
Oh
and
my gosh.
So he has that now. It's not all quite filled in yet, but he's got something to start on when he gets older and gets interested in it.
This is a little off the topic, but where do you get that big paper to print a tree like that? How does that work?
I bought a roll of canvas that it'll print on canvas for me, so it produces the most beautiful family tree on a piece of canvas that you can give your clients. And the 3 clients that I've had has been blown over by the printed tree that I do.
I guess so.
And so it's beautiful. The ink printer that I use, an Epson printer, and the ink goes right onto the canvas, and it's perfect.
Wow. Now I know there are companies out there that you can order them from, but
Right.
I never realized that was something, if you have the right printer at home.
Right. And I didn't pay too much for this printer, so it wasn't like I had spent thousands of dollars. I think I paid $400 for this Epson printer, but I got a large format printer that will print an 11 by 17 piece of paper. And then I've just figured out that, I can run a roll through there, and it works perfectly.
That's why you're such a good webmaster for us, because you're so creative. You can figure out solutions. So you talked about Blanton. Blanton is your father's
That's my
son?
father's family.
And you have some interesting manuscripts from there. Tell us about that.
I do. There were originally 9 copies of this manuscript. My great-uncle Salter Blanton did the family history and had 9 copies published. But there were 2 copies that he gave to one copy to his daughter, 1 copy to my father, and the rest he did not distribute those for some reason. So those came to me. A copy of the manuscript came to me upon my father's death. And along with it was another manuscript that no one had ever seen. It was a Wilder family in Florida, which is their big family. And neither of these 2 manuscripts were ever published. So what I'm doing, I'm hopefully going to publish these 2 manuscripts. I've written a foreword for the Blanton side, and I'm transcribing it just as it's written, because when you publish something, you have to have an electronic copy of it and a hard copy. So I didn't have any electronic copy, So I had to transcribe it. So I'm doing it page by page, chart by chart, and I'm maybe 2/3 of the way through the Blanton side. And then I hope to have it copyrighted and published.
So what's in the manuscript?
Oh, my Lord. It goes back 6 or 7 generations.
Golly.
It's got the Blanton side way back into the 1600s and forward to my grandfather's generation. But it does have my father and my sister and I in there. It doesn't have my younger sister, but he got our 2 names into the manuscript.
Wow.
Before he quit writing. And so it's quite a family history.
And he tells stories?
He does tell a few stories, but most of it's just the research in the family tree. He does a tree almost for each sibling in the family line, and so it's charts of each family and their children.
I see.
So he does, give birth, death, place of marriage, place of death, place of birth, all that typical genealogy information. But he does do some stories if he has some to write down. So,
does he give citations, or does he actually have pictures of the documents that support that?
He traveled. He traveled all over, and there's no documentation in this book.
Oops.
So that's why I'm going to publish it just as it is, and it'll be another reference someone can use, or it'll give leads to people. But my forward says, just that. This is not a true genealogical product. There are no citations, but you can use it for reference.
But it's presented exactly as it was written.
The Manuscripts is thick, and it's hardbound. He worked his whole life on it. So, and he traveled his whole life for this document. He went all over the United States to get document, because he went to all cemeteries. And I'm sure that he went to places to dig up old documents to get this information, but he didn't write it down.
But the document, he didn't leave the documents either.
No.
Shoot.
No. So, but it's like any other written piece that doesn't have citations, like a book. It'll give you a clue. It may give you researchers clues on where to go next, or, maybe that's where that information is. So it's still useful.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
I think it's really important to get it out there for people to use.
It's absolutely useful.
Yeah.
And even those family trees online are useful to some extent.
Oh, absolutely.
Because often there's a name there that you've never heard of before,
Exactly.
and it's a place to go to do some research.
Yeah. And speaking of names that you've never heard of before, I have to tell you a little story, and this is important. I traveled to Salt Lake City for business and stayed a couple extra days to see the family history library.
Oh, yeah. Wonderful.
And in that library, I had no idea that I'd find any family members, because we don't have any Mormons in our family. But I found out that Blake, my 3rd great-grandfather, Faulkner, on the other side, he was baptized by proxy. That means that his granddaughter she filled out this form, she became a Mormon and baptized all of her family members when her mother died.
Right.
So in that document was the first time I'd ever seen my 3rd great-grandmother's name and where she was born and her birth date. Along with that were all of the Blake's children's names, to include an uncle, a great uncle that I'd never heard of before. So those visits to places like that, especially to the Family History Museum, are so valuable, because I came away with much more knowledge about the family than I'd ever seen before.
Now, I've seen some of those, and for the most part, they are all pretty accurate, but occasionally they get the wrong person in there. And I'm not sure, I'm not qualified to talk about how the Mormon Church does this, but it's very important to them to try to save souls after they die, particularly. And so I think some of their missionaries and their young people do this as part of their church project. And so I would just suggest that you've probably already been able to research it and confirm it, but this is good information to know that occasionally it's the wrong person that's in there.
This one happened to be the right person because all of the other children matched what I had, and I was able to go back and find the Mormon connection there, that it was his daughter Minerva that married a Mormon man in Mississippi, Pontotoc, Mississippi, where they all moved to. And they left in a hurry because in 1845, the Mormons were being persecuted, and there was actually a bounty out on Mormons, and they had to flee. And so that's when they moved westward. And that's exactly what happened to Minerva.
There was a bounty?
There was a bounty in the South on Mormons, and they were at risk of being killed. So they left Mississippi and went to Duncan's Retreat in Salt Lake City, outside of Salt Lake City, Utah.
What do you know the story behind the bounty?
I just know that it was at that time it was like a $45 bounty for a Mormon that was killed, and so they left.
You know, we have to thank the Mormons for their interest in genealogy, because for all the stuff that we do, we rely on their records so much, and they have been digitizing records, and before that they were putting them on microfilm and microfiche. They were really the pioneers in making records universally available
to people.
And so we have a lot of gratitude to them.
I've learned so much from all the information that they have put online, and I hope to be able to go back out and visit the history library again, because it was very valuable and they were so helpful.
And the thing is that it's not just records of Mormons. It is everybody in the world.
I know.
mean, they go to all the countries you can imagine and get these agreements to be able to digitize records. And thank goodness that they do, because a lot of countries are not preserving their records.
Yes.
They keep them, but they're not keeping them safe.
Right.
And so thank goodness that those things are now available to us. And sometimes you've got to slog through one by one on a microfilm,
Right.
but it's there.
It's there. That's what we did. I had two ladies that escorted me to a microfilm reader, and they sat with me, and we went through it together, and that's how we found the documents. So.
Oh man, that's great.
Yeah, it's great.
So you talked a little bit about clients. Tell me about how do you go about getting clients, and if I approached you and said, Cheryl, I want you to research my great-grandfather from Germany, what would you tell me that I needed, and how would you get started in that?
Well, I have a little business plan that's laid out, but you've kept me really busy with webmaster work. So I haven't really launched into that, but my little company's going to be called Deep Roots, but it's not a genealogical company. It's a family history research company that's going to help my customers find their family themselves. I'm going to help them with their research.
Okay.
So that's my little tagline.
So I can't just hire you and say, when you get it, send me a bill and we're done.
Oh, no, I've done some of that work too. I've had half a dozen customers in between my FBI work and getting retired. Most of my work has been overseas work, which has been, I've done Scotland and Belgium, so I know how to do research in those two countries now online.
We need to talk.
And so I've been very successful that way. But basically what I do is when someone asks me, and it's usually, it's all word of mouth because I'm not advertising. But I always, but I do an interview with my client. So I do quite an intensive interview to get what they know about their own family.
So you're looking for them to sort of give you all the stuff that they already have, so you don't have to duplicate it.
Right. And how much they know and how much they think is true and where they think their family's from and those kind of things. And if they have pictures of grave sites or grave information, that's important to me too. So I have like a 3 or 4 page interview sheet that I use. And so then I ask them, what is it that you really, really want me to find for you?
And that's the key.
That's the key.
Because so when I was just starting out, like 25 years ago, I contacted this researcher and said, I want to know everything that you can find on all these families.
Right.
It was like, come on, you know, and so you've got to narrow it down to, let's start somewhere and go from there.
Well, one of my client who had the Scottish family, he had been married before and his wife had passed away, but he had 2 sons. And he didn't know anything about her family, and she was from Scotland, and he wanted his sons to have some idea of, you know, what their Scottish background was. So he couldn't tell me what he really wanted. So basically for him, I worked 5 months to get a skeleton tree built for his family. And not a lot of depth into the genealogy, but I could find through the Scottish records, Scotland's People is what it's called.
Right.
And it's a fantastic website, and the Scots really have documented well through their churches. So I was able to go back 8-9 generations for his family and gave him a tree on a 45-inch canvas that told his sons where his Scottish ancestry lay. Now, they can take that and continue to do more and more research if they want to, but luckily, I was able to put them in contact with a part of their family. This is a strange story. I found a lead on Ancestry. I messaged the woman. She was in France at the time, in the summertime. She wrote me right back. She said, yes, here's the family for this person. And oh, by the way, there's a half-brother they didn't know about.
Oh my gosh. And
so I put, and his daughter lives in Wales now. So the 2 sons now contact this older lady in Wales because they're living Scottish family for them, which they had no idea of. So this went from Alexandria, Virginia, to France, to Wales, and it was very rewarding to.
Oh, he must have been thrilled.
He was thrilled. Of course, you know, and I got paid some money for my time. I like to spend this. It's never enough. You know, you don't get paid for all your time. In anything you do in life, you don't get paid for the time.
That's true.
But most genealogists will hone in on 1 or 2 things, and that's what they find for you, and that's what you would pay them for. But this was a special case.
I think working with genealogists, I think you start with something just as a starting place.
Right.
Because you're always building, aren't you? And you want to make sure that first foundation is correct. And then you can keep going and keep making sure that it's accurate so that when you get to that 6th generation, you feel pretty comfortable. You got the right guy.
Yeah.
And that's the trick. Now, was the Scottish name one that was unusual, or was it like some of the ones I research, which are like Mackenzie and McFarlane, and you know, there's a zillion.
It was unusual, and luckily her family stayed in the same part of Scotland.
Yeah, that's good.
It just went from Edinburgh out to Dunfermline County and a little bit south. And all of the family history back that far stayed in that little 200-mile area.
That's helpful.
It was very helpful. I probably couldn't have done that. I mean, there were some outliers that would go to Inverness and some other places, but not very many. Most of the core family stayed in that general area.
When did they immigrate?
She never immigrated. They married in Scotland, and she passed away over there. And so her family stayed in Scotland. They never came here. He married her when he was a serviceman in England, and so she was always in Europe. And their two children were born there, and so she never came over the pond.
Wow. Well, I think researching in European or Persia is kind of intimidating for most people, and so you probably shy away from that because that's too hard to do. But honestly, you can't get across the pond until you've done all the work in the U.S.
But the Belgium research that I've done was also largely through the churches, and it was so well documented. It's so easy to find.
Really?
You have to translate some documents. Luckily, I know a little bit of French, and a lot of the Belgian documents were in French, so I didn't have any problem there. But the churches in Europe did a phenomenal job of keeping all of those records: birth, death, where they were buried, and marriages. So it was a good, easy start for me doing genealogical research overseas.
Yeah, and that's where the Family History Library comes in, because they have digitized a lot of those church records. And in many cases, civil records weren't required until late 1800s. And so you've got to find the church.
Right.
But those church records are great because they usually say what the daddy's name is, and they might have the neighbors and other things like that. Cheryl, this has been so interesting. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
And thank you for what you do for our organization. It's a lot. You wear so many hats in it, and we really do appreciate it.
Well, I've learned a lot. I'm ready to meet some people live, though. So when I started, then COVID hit. So
I know.
I've really not gotten to learn the people personally, but we will.
And please visit our website is mvgenealogy.org. We're going to be back in person one of these days, but meanwhile, you can certainly find us online on the website and look for our programs, because we're continuing to do those. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
I think that's so interesting. I'm very interested